All right, looks like we are on YouTube.
Mhm.
So, hi Jill, how are you?
Pretty darn good. How are you?
Good. Well, I'm glad to have you on again here to talk about hair mineral analysis and adrenal fatigue because who's not burnout that you don't know, or that you know, I should say.
Almost nobody.
Yeah. I mean, especially after what happened a few years ago, this pandemic thing. It definitely put people in a lot of fear and that fear, the adrenals hold fear. You know that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and then the liver holds anger.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
so that's definitely a recipe for an adrenal burnout, right? To have that going on for so long. So we're going to discuss not the vibrational frequency level as I just mentioned, but we're going to discuss here what's happening with your biochemistry and especially in terms of minerals and how those get imbalanced when you are adrenally fatigued. So Jill is a nurse and she also was vaccine injured at some point, and this kind of brought her back into this whole holistic world and figuring out how to recover from this injury. And now she's almost fully recovered or fully recovered, what would you say?
I'm good. I'm pretty darn healthy. Uh,
Yeah.
about 2 or more years of detoxing and just going on the journey. And I think that's why a lot of us go down this path is something will happen within our lifetime. It sends us down a road that kind of changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they say, things don't happen to us, they happen for us, right? Even if it seems like a crazy situation, like the things we were talking about earlier outside of this.
Yeah.
But, God always has a bigger plan. And so we're excited to have you here and dive deeper on this topic. And I know, everything that's happened to you has led you to this point where you can now share how to get out of adrenal fatigue and balance your energy and, really live life to the fullest because you're feeling great. So let's dive into your presentation. So as she gets set up here, she works for a company called Eidon Ionic Minerals, and it's one of the companies that I use specifically to help balance my minerals. And you can see how there's these are the ones that I personally use. They have different forms of it, but I love the concentrates because they're super small and easy to take, and you can put them in your water, and it doesn't really taste like much except maybe a little bit like salty water sometimes, depending on how much you use.
Mhm.
So even kids take it, and they're really amazing. They absorb really well. So I'm gonna let Jill take over and explain how you can see how you're adrenally fatigued on a hair test. So all you do is cut your hair and send it into a lab, and now you have some information to know if you are even adrenally fatigued and how to address that. So here we go.
So I made a PowerPoint. It's called HTMA, which stands for Hair Test Mineral Analysis and Adrenal Fatigue. Mineral balance and mitochondrial function, because the mitochondria are the powerhouses within our cells, and they basically are the drivers of everything. They allow for things to go in and out of our cells. They allow us to metabolize, they create our energy for us, they help us detoxify. Um, Basically at every level. And when our cells are not functioning, we get issues with our tissues, our glands, our organs. And today, talking about the adrenal glands, I am a hair mineral analysis practitioner, and I'm not a doctor, but I do study this stuff every single day. I have a lot of tests that come across my desk every day, and I think there's been two people that have come across my desk in the last year and a half or so out of hundreds of tests that haven't been in some form of adrenal fatigue. There are markers that I look for when I get the test, associated minerals and markers. One of them, the main one being sodium, second one being potassium, which Jacqueline just showed you. Third one is magnesium. Fourth one is zinc. The ratios that I look at that tell me more than anything are sodium to potassium. This is a ratio of sodium to potassium. And another ratio, which is sodium to magnesium. And I'll go a little bit more into that here in just a minute. I put a sample up here on the right side. The sodium to potassium ratio. So our adrenal glands secrete hormones, and these hormones are associated with different minerals, and we're able to actually see hormone production within the tissues by looking at these individual minerals. The ratio that is considered, if you look over here, can you see my marker here?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you see this sodium to potassium right here, this right here is a 9. It should be, the ideal is 2.4 of sodium to 1 part potassium. This is the ideal where we want you to be. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what these minerals mean individually. This particular, I just grabbed a couple random tests. This person here has an elevated ratio. An elevated ratio right here indicates acute stress, a fight or flight response. And I see this a lot with people, especially we might have had something happen about 3 years ago, but the situation hasn't ended and it just keeps unfolding. It's like slices of an onion. More and more darkness continues to come to light, right? And it's very stressful for a lot of people because we don't know what is coming next. I feel like a lot of us are feeling that right now. It's like a low level of despair, just we don't know what's going to happen in the future type feeling.
Or even still recovering, right, from what happened.
And I mean, it's not, I know for me in my life, I live in San Diego, California, and you know, it's the gas prices, it's the food, it's the uncertainty, just with a lot of things, you know, we've got chemical spills and things like that going on. It's like, what's going on in our world? You know, are we headed into WW3? You know, there's just a lot, and I think people are feeling it. And it's if you have the media on, or I'm sure like with the social media, that you can't really escape necessarily the world that we're in, and then you add all the stressors of our personal lives in with everything that's going on externally outside of our homes. It's a lot for people. So the adrenal glands, when I see these ratios out of balance, it basically shows me that the adrenal glands are either overactive, or the other scenario is there's not really much left here with the adrenal glands. So there's a couple ways that it goes. The adrenal glands can become overactive due to inflammation, heavy metal toxicity, because heavy metals actually will store in the adrenal glands and will actually create this imbalance in the secretion of the hormones. And oftentimes it also can indicate a zinc or magnesium deficiency. This very elevated sodium to potassium ratio right here, this indicates, for me, when I see it elevated like this is, to me, says inflammation, because sodium is associated with the hormone aldosterone. So when I see the sodium elevated and when this ratio is elevated, it usually means that sodium is dominant, and sodium is a pro-inflammatory hormone, meaning it creates inflammation, and sometimes inflammation can be beneficial, but not long term. It's not something that we're meant to be within chronically or long term. This elevated sodium to potassium ratio can also indicate weak kidneys, and it can also sometimes mean altered immunity, possible autoimmune, which can also be, you know, related to inflammatory as well. So in the case with someone who has this elevated ratio, I'll actually give potassium, and potassium in those cases is actually anti-inflammatory. Potassium, slide here. Potassium is actually related to another adrenal hormone, which is cortisol, and I'll go into that more in just a minute. A low ratio, if this was in the lower end here, indicates chronic exhaustion, stage of stress, and lowered immunity. So it's basically the adrenal glands have been working, and now there's really nothing left. Acute and chronic stress causes increased adrenal activity. You know, we have different responses for when something is happening right now, situation right now. Let's say we have stuff going on with our family or our job that's creating acute stress, but then we've got long-term financial stress that's happening on the side. Maybe we have relationships at home that are creating additional stress for us. So everybody's in some form or another, and if they're not, God bless them. You know, it's pretty rare. results in increased secretion of hormone aldosterone. So aldosterone, I want to talk a little bit more about what aldosterone does. Aldosterone actually causes the kidneys to retain sodium. So when we retain sodium, it can increase our blood pressure. And then if anybody has like heart failure or any heart conditions or any other, like if their kidneys are already weak, we can cause all kinds of additional issues when we have increased sodium retention because sodium holds on to water. So it can cause all kinds of other issues when this is out of balance on top of the inflammation. So yeah, if you think about people's doctors always tell them keep your diet low in sodium because you don't want to raise your blood pressure. There's a whole different kind of scenario with that as well too because I use sea salt and I use our electrolyte blend. Can you see me? Am I on camera?
Yep.
Okay, I can't see myself. Maybe that's good. So we have electrolytes. I often give our electrolytes and I'll actually give sea salt. I'll give sodium in the form of sea salt because you're getting a complement of a multitude of minerals that actually helps. It works synergistically and actually works supportively to the adrenal glands. I don't know if that's the word, but it's supportive.
I could see you, but if you could show there, like right in the middle, that'd be good. A little bit. There we go. Yeah. So that's the electrolytes that Eidon has. So it's in that. So that's in water, right?
Yeah, this is the dilute. I like
Yeah. So
concentrates because, well, I mean, I use them mainly, but then when I give stuff to my pets and stuff, sometimes I like to use these more dilute bottles.
hmm
Yeah,
it's just easier for people if they don't want to have
yeah,
to mix it with water.
yeah. So you don't want to get too much table salt. Like table salt is bad. That's just straight sodium chloride. That'll just straight up raise your blood pressure, whereas a sea salt is going to be supportive of the adrenal glands.
So that's basically like what the electrolytes are.
Electrolytes, yeah, has sea salt in there, and then there's calcium, magnesium, chromium, chloride, sodium, and potassium, and then there's sea salt in here.
Is chromium an electrolyte, or is that just something they thought would be a good complement to that?
It's not necessarily an electrolyte that I know of. It does help balance blood sugar, and when your adrenal glands are not functioning properly, you can actually have blood sugar issues, and I'll go into that a little bit in a moment.
Yeah, I thought that was really neat how they added that chromium in there because of that.
It's not an electrolyte as far as I know, but I often will use this on my menus because I'm looking for like an overall complement in the chromium. These are all the minerals in here are fairly small doses, but it's super effective. I see shifts on the test with this product, so I know it works. A lot of the other products that you get, you have to take a lot more, whereas these liquids, they work no matter what, even if you have a gut that is a mess, which a lot of people do.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a whole nother subject.
Mhm.
So fight or flight, I already talked about that. So cortisol hormone, which is potassium represents the cortisol, which is actually anti-inflammatory, and that's why giving up potassium can actually be supportive in the scenario with that higher ratio.
So potassium helps to raise cortisol.
Yeah, so and you don't want to have too high or too low of either because when cortisol is elevated, cortisol is a natural steroid. And if anybody knows anything about steroids, they come with their own set of problems if you have a consistent high level of them, because it's a steroid. So what steroids do is they elevate blood sugar and they can lower your immunity. So that's why you don't want to have an imbalance of these minerals for too long. We can only compensate for so long, and then we get issues with our immune system and other things. So
hmm that's why you want to do a hair test.
yes. So the stress can be emotional or physical. So I'm not just talking about things that are occurring in our life that are creating stress for us. The physical stuff can also be inflammation and heavy metals can be basically physical stressors to the actual gland itself. On the hair test, when I get the first hair test back, I usually am not getting a super clear picture of what heavy metals are present, but often when I see that really elevated sodium to potassium, I'm thinking in my mind there's probably more heavy metals here that I'm not seeing on this first test. What I do most of the time when I create a menu for the hair analysis, I put a small dose of iodine on there, and some selenium, and then often I'll use either like a silica or our joint support, which is silica and sulfur. And what's going to happen is those are actually going to help bring out these heavy metals. It's going to basically help chelate them or bind them or create excretion within our body because we've created a detoxification pathway. And once we begin to, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, am I allowed to say detox? Let's say we're working,
Yeah, detox is a safe word
okay,
as
we're
of now, at least.
eliminating these. Basically, upon a second test, often I'll see these heavy metals will look much higher on a second test, and it's because you're actually excreting them, and then we start to see the growth in the hair. And then often these specific heavy metals are hidden in the adrenal glands. So when we can get the heavy metals out of these glands, so it's not just your adrenal glands, like they hide in your thyroid, they hide in your brain, your bones. But when we can eliminate these heavy metals, we begin to rebalance our systems and our bodies. And then we are able to become balanced much easier because the heavy metals compete with the essential minerals. Sodium to magnesium is another ratio that I look at, which is right here. This right here is my marker for adrenal fatigue, meaning like this person has nothing left. And this one is low
Mm.
too. So we've got low on this first like primary adrenal marker here. And then we've got low over here. This person is tired. And then we take the whole combination of this whole picture, and this just tells me this person probably is not too motivated for life. They're at their end. Um, the hormones have excreted for so long, the stress has just continued. This person, is probably a good idea for this person right here to make some lifestyle changes.
Hmm.
So the
So
ratio,
if the sodium to potassium ratio was in range, but that one was low, then what would you say about their stress and where they are in life?
adrenal fatigue, like right now, they're no longer necessarily in a fight or flight type of scenario, but they're in adrenal fatigue. This person is probably tired, especially when you take in the combination of this ratio here and this ratio here. So I'm looking at a full picture. But yeah, this one can be right here in the middle. If this one is this low, this person is chronically kind of exhausted.
Uh-huh. So,
So
but if the sodium to potassium ratio is around that 2.4, then it will be like they'll respond to stress better still, right?
Uh, that I was actually thinking about this the other day. So the thing is, it's possible too that you might be catching this person from being elevated here to where they're about at a point where they're petering out, and it could be in the midst of being on the downward here. You know what I mean? It might
Hmm.
just happen that we are catching the picture as it's coming down and kind of tanking. That's why I like,
Oh, so it's being excreted.
meaning like
Okay.
the adrenal hormones are petering out, like the adrenal glands are so tired that they're on their way from going to that high level that we originally saw down to this lower level. I mean, it could be just kind of shifting. It's better to catch the adrenal fatigue right here with the fight or flight and to address it at this point than to catch it here
Mm.
along in combination with this. That's why it's good. I like to get the hair test every 3 to 4 months, so I get a picture of like, okay, so what is continuing to happen with this person. And I do a whole emotional assessment with what I send out with my stuff. Do you tap into kind of what's going on with people too?
Oh yeah, I send a lot of questionnaires and things.
Mhm.
But I work with people pretty closely too. So I do emotion work on the side and then things, I mean, in a 50-minute consultation, you can't really get everyone's complete life story all the time. And people don't always even tell you everything. So, but once I start doing emotion work, there's so much more layers of the person that comes out that could be causing um some, all these minerals to be imbalanced as well.
You know, so when you see these ratios, this usually means that these two minerals that are within this ratio are antagonistic towards each other, or that they will cancel each other out. Often these same minerals can work synergistically with each other, but within a certain balance to each other. Um, so usually, like if sodium is elevated, magnesium is I'll either see it really high or sometimes low, which indicates to me losses or, not metabolizing it quite so well. So sometimes when you get a blood draw, you might see elevated hormones in your blood. Sometimes you might not. Tissues are showing me what is actual storage, whereas blood is just a picture of what's going on right now, whereas the hair actually shows me what's going on about like a 3-4 month period. So they may not be reaching the tissues. The minerals might not be reaching the tissues due to impaired cellular permeability, impaired energy production, and or presence of toxins or heavy metals. So these heavy metals, they compete for the spaces of the essential minerals, and they can block them from getting in. I see this a lot too with heavy metals like lead and calcium. So getting the heavy metals out, I think, is super important in working to balance your glands. So I've read before in a couple different places that are low ratio right here. These people usually have a hard time building muscle. Like if somebody's going to the gym day after day and they're just not seeing.
Mm.
I don't know like the depths of that. I just thought it was a fun fact.
That is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, most people that are trying to, or a lot of people, I should say, maybe trying to get healthy or they'd like to look good too. I would think most people would want to look good whether they admit it or not. So that's,
Absolutely.
and muscle is actually more than just looking good. I mean, it's really important for your health and when you grow old too, you want to be able to have muscle to not get osteoporosis and have your bones be strong and be able to walk and all those other stuff that's important, for living a
Don't forget
quality of
that
life.
when we look good, we feel good.
And then there's that.
It's all tied in together. I
Yeah.
realize I'm like, I don't have my PowerPoints all memorized. So when I don't have my bullets perfectly timed. So I just them all down
That's
right
okay.
there. Contributing factors and symptoms. So the metals specifically, and this one actually has copper with it, that store in the adrenal glands are aluminum, mercury, and cadmium. Copper is an essential mineral, but it can also be toxic, and it can also hinder the performance of glands. People who are in adrenal fatigue tend to have cravings. They have chocolate cravings, they have coffee cravings, they have sugar cravings. They're craving the things that will trigger a dopamine response, basically.
Mm.
So it can be a good indicator that you may have adrenal fatigue if you have cravings. It's like, I would describe it as just kind of a void that you feel like you can't fill no matter what. Um, you might have a cup of coffee and then you're tired again, or you might have some chocolate. Like here we have chocolate, it's dark chocolate here, Eidon. It's really, really good. And it's a little boost, but it's an indicator like if you need to continually do this or eat this to stay awake, you're probably having some adrenal fatigue.
Hmm. And
Uh,
by the way, that's like no sugar, right? No sugar
yeah, it's
chocolate.
birch xylitol, which is really, really clean and good.
Yeah. Isn't xylitol good for your teeth too?
Super good for your teeth. So it's cacao, organic cacao, non-GMO birch, which is honestly way better than an organic corn, which is the stevia. What is that? Stevia? Or no, two forms of xylitol. There's birch and then there's the corn. We went for the birch. It's cleaner. Organic cacao butter and Peruvian salt, and that's it. So it's good for your adrenal glands too, the Peruvian salt.
Nice.
um, So when your adrenal glands are out of balance, you can have issues with blood pressure, blood sugar instability, and immune dysfunction. So it can be a range of different things for different people. Um, and then supportive factors, when you're working on correcting your adrenal glands, it's important to get enough sleep. It's important to follow a clean, good diet too. Like you don't just throw supplements at issues and expect your whole world to turn around. It is a full, complete, self-empowered. You got to be motivated in actually making changes and anything that you put in your mouth, like making sure that it's beneficial, that you're not eating things that are making your body react from moment to moment. Whereas, like, you eat something that's got preservatives or glyphosates, Roundup, things like this, genetically modified foods, to where your body is like, what the heck? What did you just do? Or even refined sugar and carbohydrates, where your body is reacting in the moment to just correct to this thing you just ate. Whereas when we're trying to repair things like our adrenal glands, we want our body, everything that we put into our body, to be beneficial and supportive to the overall process, so that it's not, so that what we're taking in is not in, like, contributing to the problem. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And I see you have stress reduction activities. I literally just posted something on my Instagram, this long post about the hormones that the adrenals produce, as well as kind of some things to think about. And I didn't even talk about minerals or none of that because if we're not really thinking about our stress properly, like whatever is stressing us, then other lifestyle things aside from even food, then um, how can we ever have balanced adrenals? So for example, um, if you drive 2 hours to work every day and one way, and then you drive 2 hours back, and then you have a full workload, and then you're not sleeping, like let's say you're only sleeping like 5 hours a night,
Mhm.
how do you think that you're going to recover with your adrenals? You're going to keep burning your nutrients.
Yeah.
So, but then that leads you down the rabbit hole of like, well, what do I do? This is my job. And then so, I even posted stuff about like, you have to have faith. There's an element of faith when it comes to healing
Yeah.
and believing in God and tapping into that higher power because sometimes you have to make life changes that are not so easy. And I know Jill, you can attest for that one.
Oh yeah, I left the medical field, and I've had to recreate my whole entire life. And I'm kind of laughing over here because it seems like we all kind of are going like this as we go about day to day. And I'm so thankful to have coworkers like I have, because we're able to come into work and we vent, and it's like one of us is having a really good day and the other person might not be, and we can kind of pull each other up. But I always say this is the prison planet. This is the prison planet. It's like we're all constantly just trying to keep our heads above water. So I think it's really important to support each other.
Yeah. And then there's the whole idea of like what stress is already in your biofield. So that's a whole nother layer that you can do these things for what's going on in your life right now to shift things, to try to change things, aside from diet, mineral balancing, and changing your life in any way that you need to now. But, we started this video about talking about the pandemic and how people could still be having issues as a result of that. And part of that is, yeah, your minerals and all that probably got imbalanced, but you could still be vibrating at that frequency of fear or
Mhm.
anger or whatever that can cause. And that's just one example. We all have different types of traumas, and maybe someone didn't have a trauma from that, but there could have been something from before when they're young in their life. Like my dad died when I was young. And a lot of times when I do emotion work, there's like new layers of healing that has to happen for that to go to the next level in my personal health. So, I feel like I've dug up a lot, but sometimes there's new layers. And so, depending on how deep the trauma is, then there could be, more things to look at even on a frequency level. And then now the minerals are imbalanced. So,
I think that the last 3 years have been about, like, peeling these layers up, and we keep finding more and more layers. It's about, like, bringing these things to the light that have been in the dark within ourselves, but also within society. And we're all seeing kind of like the world is not necessarily what we thought that it was. There's all this dark and evil stuff going on, but it's coming to the light so that we can alchemize it so things can get better. And I think that we're all kind of doing that on an individual basis as well. I do want to bring up right here, this is mercury. I grabbed this test because it had some really good metals to look at. Sometimes I get these tests and they will be all the way to the top, like twice over with these heavy metals. This is a pretty good one because it's an array of different heavy metals. And often, if I were to see this on a first test, it's a huge indicator to me that there is a lot more hidden like the tip of the iceberg here that is stored that is probably hindering a lot of stuff. So it's a really good full picture to get.
Do you remember if that was the first test or?
It wasn't that person's first test. I just grabbed it because it was no, that person is excreting.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's
So
excretion and detoxification with that specific person.
do you remember if they had those toxic metals showing on their first test or
Uh,
anything?
the mercury was there, but it was lower. The mercury can often be from the amalgam, the silver fillings, and that's usually more for us that are like middle aged and over with those silver fillings. The mercury, every time you chew, is emitting a vapor, so it's like a constant. I wish I could go back. I don't know how to make it go back, but it's a constant mercury. It's constant mercury toxicity, and then with the aluminum, which is a major problem with multiple essential minerals that will block out. The aluminum, I always say to people who have elevated aluminum, stop using your antiperspirant. If you're using antiperspirant because you have issues with odor, that means you need to clean up your diet or you need to detoxify because there's a lot there to detoxify. We have lymph nodes, lymph glands underneath our armpits, and if we are blocking those off so that we can't sweat, we're stopping our basically our
Hmm.
lymphatic system from supporting our bodies. And if, like I said, if you're malodorous, you need to clean up your diet and you need to sweat. Like you need to clean your
Yeah.
sit in the sauna, go for a run, you need to sweat. There's a reason for it. I make homemade and perforant. I use baking soda very liberally. I use some arrowroot powder, coconut oil, and then you can use essential oils, whatever you like.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I went up and worked out in the sun here in San Diego for 2 days straight outside and used that. And I was so surprised that I didn't actually, in the past, sometimes working out in the sun and you're dripping sweat outside all day, like I'd get sneaky. So it's an indicator that things are pretty good.
Yeah,
Um,
so I have a client too that teaches hot Pilates and so obviously is sweating. I'm pretty fit and she even was telling me that she found that she wasn't really sweating. I mean, she wasn't really not necessarily sweating, but not smelling anymore after working with each other for a few months here. So, and obviously detoxing and pulling out other pathogens and things like that too.
that's
So it's
something that,
crazy how it changes.
yep. So sometimes we can't get rid of the things in our life to eliminate our stressors. I'll tell you, I worked in a hospital for almost 10 years and I hated alms. I love it. I love patient care and I love taking care of people. And there are moments that I would not replace for anything because it's such an intimate position to be in, like one on one with people. And I absolutely love that aspect of it. But most of the system is hospitals are, it's gaslighting. Always, it's like do more and more with less and less. The problem is you. It's not this system. And I couldn't have just necessarily walked away from that in just a minute. It was 5 years of schooling, and then I'm a single mom. You can't necessarily just walk away from your responsibilities, but you can start to lay a path where, and the biggest thing was from I did jump at one point and I had no idea what was going to happen. When certain things happened, I just said no, ethically and morally, I cannot. I don't work for them. I'm sorry, but I feel like
Yeah.
it's the bad guys. Like these hands work for God.
Yeah. Oh, that gave me chills when you said that.
When you lay a path out, it takes a lot of prayer. And I
Yeah.
really, it was like boom, 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 everything fell in line. I feel like when you do the right thing, that
Mm.
things work out for you.
Yeah.
I have the chills now too.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
not always
not
easy.
everybody can just jump from their situation, and it takes a lot of faith. In the moment that I chose to jump, like my faith was
Yeah.
like, something's gonna work out, something has to work out.
Yeah, and being in tune with God too, of knowing when to jump. I mean, it's not always a safe thing to jump or a best thing to jump. So we're not necessarily, saying that everyone needs to jump off the cliff here
Yeah,
and just but I mean, I've done stuff like that too, where it's just like, okay, I can't do this. Like I've also left a job because I didn't support it either. And I was like, I don't believe in this. And I already knew enough that I can't do that. But
The thing is,
I mean, I think at the end of the day, I probably would have had some backups. Maybe in the back of my head, I already knew that. I don't know, but I just know I couldn't do it.
but then everything worked out better than you thought.
Oh yeah, totally.
I was gonna kind of bring up is
I left it and I left that job and then went to the farmer's market and someone offered me a job.
sometimes
And
things
it was just a little, it was just a little bit. It wasn't much, but it was something that I believed in, selling microgreens and um, it made it suited its purpose as I was transitioning to something else
the
and doing
tone
other
of
things. I did that with other things at the time. So, and I learned more stuff about holistic health and wellness and how to help people. And so anyways, yeah, I mean, God always has a good plan for you. So I would definitely make sure you're tuning in because I really feel like a lot of adrenal fatigue is kind of like the enemy's plan of taking us away from that peace that God wants us to have.
100%. Um, so I've got about 5 minutes. The I just want to say when you can support your adrenal glands and you can get your adrenals balanced where the hormones are balanced, the things in life that come at you, they don't feel so overwhelming. And I've gone from there to here and I've felt the shift where it's like, don't sweat the small stuff. Nothing really matters that much. And my coworker and I are always saying that, Rashawn. We're like, nothing really matters that much. Like everything's gonna work out. And the things that you think are horrible in the moment, like the worst things, like I did not have my identity anymore when I left the medical system. But those are the things that make the hugest shifts and changes for the better in our life.
Yeah.
So I'm just popping up here with these extra little bullets. When you can balance your adrenal glands, you're a lot more likely to do the things that you are supportive to your body, like eat right, make better decisions. You're not making like triggered moment by moment decisions on things that you're putting in your mouth. And then finding the motivation for life again. When I corrected my adrenal glands, it was like within 1 week, instead of wanting to go home and crawl in bed after years of feeling like that, I was up doing the dishes, I was making dinner, I started projects in my house again, I knocked down a wall between my kids'
Hmm.
living room, and it was just like, this is what it is, what life is about. I want to feel like living, like not crawling in bed.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think doing tests like this and any other type of functional medicine tests, I should say any of them. I have a group of them that I like to use, but so I can't speak for all of them, but when you can find something out that like your adrenals are tanked, I did a hormone test when I did my adrenal test after ha giving birth about 8 months after, and you know what that can come with. If you don't know, first of all, being pregnant, there's a lot of hormonal shifts that can happen, and then you give birth, and that's a big situation. I was in labor for 5 days, so that can definitely, do something, even if it's just a trauma, which is not just a trauma.
Oh
And
yeah.
then you not sleeping for all these months. And so you want to talk about a recipe for adrenal burnout. Be sympathetic to women that have just given birth because, nowadays a lot of women have to go back to work and, or they're expected to do a lot of things that men are supposed to do. And this is really, like, I already knew a lot of this idea of, we're different. But it really makes you realize how much you're different when you give birth. And um, I just really feel for women that, have many children and they're not getting or just at all have any and right and don't have the support from, their loved ones because or they just expect them to, keep up with everything else. It's not easy. It's not easy because stuff like this is happening in our body and the hormones are changing. And so it could be very tiring, if you're not sleeping for all that time, as I just mentioned, that can really throw your adrenals off as well as other hormones. So,
Everybody needs to give themselves a pat on the back. We all deserve a pat on the back. We're getting through it.
yeah.
There have been some hard years, and then you add children on top of it, and you're raising a baby.
Hmm.
That's such hard work. It's like nonstop, nonstop.
Yeah. Well,
Received.
grace is the word that like that's what I also posted in that Instagram post. It's like you really have to accept God's grace. Like
We,
adrenal fatigue is so it's yes, balance your minerals, take your minerals because you're gonna feel a lot better. You're gonna think a lot clearer and all that. But in terms of being able to get to the deeper other root causes, um, you obviously have to analyze your life, and part of that is not trying to be so perfect all the time and not maybe achieving for excellence is a good idea. I love that. But I'm always trying to be a better version of, of myself and put out the best content and things like that. But at the same time, we have to be able to balance that with knowing when to accept grace and that you're not always going to be perfect.
perfect.
Because perfectionism is definitely a recipe for adrenal burnout.
And we do it to ourselves. Most of it is self-driven, like needing the feeling of needing perfection. Anyway, I gotta sneak out.
All right. Well, it was so good chatting with you. And I know some people needed to hear this message all the way to the end. So anyways, if you guys are interested in Eidon Ionic minerals and mineral balancing, um, I have these concentrates on my website that Jill's company provides. And you can reach out to either one of us for hair mineral analysis. And definitely get your tests at some point. It's really life-changing when you start to understand what's going on in your body. Seriously, like you might know that you need to make some shifts, like consciously or subconsciously at least. But when you see a test and it proves how you're feeling, it's so much easier to make a life shift that you already may even know too. So, and then so much more because obviously you know what to do about balancing yourself in terms of minerals and things like that. So thank you, Jill, for taking the time to go through this with us, and we will continue our series probably in a month or so. All
Perfect.
right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.